Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are really excited that you've joined us for this webinar on generating, importing, and managing software bill of materials, or SBOMs for short. Today, we'll be featuring Cortez Frazier, a senior product manager here at FOSSA. My name is Elisa Velarde, also from FOSSA, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Before I go over our agenda and introduce Cortez, I'd like to cover some housekeeping items. First, we will try to answer any audience questions as they are submitted, but if we can't get to all of them, we will have some time at the end for Q&A. So please post any questions you have in the questions section. Next, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send you the recording after the event. And then finally, we here at FOSSA will be following up after the webinar with a few additional resources and to see if there's anything we can do to help you and your organization with generating and managing SBOMs. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. The first part of our webinar will cover some important context around SBOMs, including the biggest reasons SBOMs matter and who should care about SBOMs. The second part will really be the focus of today's presentation. We'll show you how you can manage essential SBOM activities or processes using FOSSA. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with some additional Q&A if we weren't able to get to everything earlier in the presentation. Before I hand things off to Cortez, just a quick word for folks who are not familiar with FOSSA. We provide technology that makes it easier and more efficient for organizations to manage the open source software they use. This includes identifying and remediating open source vulnerabilities, as well as identifying and complying with licenses and open source code. Additionally, because the foundation of FOSSA is really our ability to quickly identify and inventory the components in your software, we offer a comprehensive SBOM solution. You can use FOSSA to inventory your open source, import SBOMs from third-party products, and generate a complete SBOM in a range of formats, including SPDX and CycloneDX. And Cortez will cover that in more detail during our presentation. So without further delay, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Cortez Frazier Jr. Like I mentioned, Cortez is a senior product manager here at FOSSA, and he's been instrumental in building our SBOM functionality and working closely with a range of customers who use it. So he's very well informed and has a very informed perspective on how to best use SBOMs once they're generated. He also has an extensive security background, so he has a valuable perspective on security-related SBOM use cases as well. So with that, Cortez, I'll hand things over to you to share a bit more about your background and then kick off the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Elisa. As you've already said, my name is Cortez. I'm super excited to talk to you all about really SBOM lifecycle management is the term that I'm going to kind of coin for today's purposes. A little bit about my background. Prior to working at FOSSA, I've worked at medium-sized companies in the form of Puppet and massive-sized companies in the form of GE Power, always within the security space. And so as a practitioner, I'm in the form of security architect, and then as a product manager, I'm at Puppet and building and scaling, rolling out security software. Now, without further ado, I really want to kind of just hop into why we're here, what we're looking to accomplish, and how do you start managing SBOMs with FOSSA. First and foremost, before we kind of get into a lot of what I'd like to demo hands-on within the platform itself, let's take a step back and figure out, why should you care about SBOMs and who should care? The first one is actually pretty straightforward, which is you're doing business in some way, shape, or form with government contracts or something of that nature, and thus with between the executive order and the minimum element, you're required to, so you have to, right? Very straightforward, takes it off your hand, makes it easy in that regard. But there's actually a lot of reasons outside of that you may want to care about SBOMs as well. The first one is that you are concerned about what third-party risks are being introduced into your environment. Example, you may be a Slack customer, you want to understand what packages that Slack is using, so that way you know what your risk posture is on both your first party and third party. And so being able to see what third party risk is being introduced by importing those SBOMs is an activity that I'll walk you through later today. You may also just care about improving your overall general risk posture. And so doing things like generating SBOMs on a per commit basis every time that you're doing new revisions is an incredibly healthy practice to have both an audit trail of any previous commit to revisions that you've submitted, but then also having a historical reference of what the risk posture was at that point in time, and being able to look back at that over the course of time. And so really, really helpful as it pertains to managing risk posture there. And then lastly, you're a producer of software. And so you're kind of the opposite of number two there. And your customers care about importing that risk. And thus they want to make sure that you're able to expose that in a way for them to easily consume. So those are some of the reasons or why you would care about an SBOM. The question is then also, well, who more specifically? And I'll go through this one really fast because I've kind of already given you a little bit of a tease there. But on the producer side, you produce software, and thus you want to make sure that your consumers of that software are able to understand what your current risk posture is, but then also going back to that maintenance use case of making sure that your developers, that you are managing that risk posture on a program level. Right. Then from a purchaser side, I want to consume that software, and thus I want to ingest SBOMs. That way I can understand my end-to-end for both first party and third party. And then lastly, on the operator side, which is your developer side, I want to make sure that I'm having an active risk management program, so that way I can actually address risk before the producers on the program side start to detect it. And so those are some of the people who would care about SBOMs. Let's talk a little bit about some of the SBOM activity that you'll do over the course of this life cycle. Starting first and foremost, an SBOM is only as powerful as the accuracy of the project that's been onboarded. So we got to get an accurate component analysis, and we have to get that onboarded into your software platform of choice. In today's example, it's going to be FOSSA, of course. From there, after you've done a complete analysis, you then want to generate those SBOMs using whichever fields that you desire. You'll do some management there, kind of going back to that per commit basis and making sure that you can manage any license or vulnerability issues that have been surfaced after importing that particular project. From a third-party risk perspective, obviously, you'll want to import those SBOMs so then you can have a single pane of glass across your first and third-party risks. And then lastly, we'll kind of talk through some distribution options that you have, both within FOSSA directly and then outside of the platform as well. So without further ado, let's start to get into each one of these particular steps, and then I can kind of hop into my demo directly. First and foremost, you have to talk about onboarding. As I said, you are only able to create an accurate SBOM if you have an accurate component analysis, making sure that you have the languages that you use properly supported and that your dependencies are fully identified. And then, of course, this is what then allows for us to then have accurate vulnerability detection, accurate license detection, and all the other downstream activities that occur afterwards. How do we onboard a project in the FOSSA? You have a few different ways. You can either integrate directly with your VCS tool of choice, or you can integrate via the CLI. And I'm going to demonstrate for you how to integrate via the CLI real quickly. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so for a little bit of context setting here, I just went ahead and did a git clone of Vue, a very popular JavaScript framework that a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. And we're going to do an analysis. And so for us, we will just do a FOSSA analyze. I can spell. There we go. And for the sake of the demo, just so we can track it, I'm going to pass in a revision just to make that completely clear. And you can think of a revision as a one-to-one matching to a particular commit. So we'll do this webinar demo. Number 5 there, and then we'll kick off our analysis. What this is doing is then walking through all the files in this particular Git repository. It's then going to do a mapping of, or what I call a dependency graph. It's going to create a dependency graph based off of that install plan. And then it's going to send only that dependency graph back up to FOSSA server so we can then start to analyze that. And so you'll see that most recent scan that I just submitted. It's already through. And we can just go ahead and run an issue scan. It'll pick that up automatically, of course, but I'm going to force it just to kind of speed up the process for us. From there, we can kind of quickly see some of the information that we've gotten back from here. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, so we're going to pause there real quickly. But starting with just pure onboarding, a quick analysis via FOSSA Analyze is all that it would take. But I will show you real quickly some of our other integration solutions just from an end-to-end perspective. So just kind of talk through the CLI, but you can also just integrate directly with your version control system of choice. In this case, I can integrate with GitHub. I can go ahead and auth against that. I'll do it without linking my account in this particular case. And my credentials, I've already did this earlier today. And so it's just kind of off against that particular organization, and then start to pull in some repositories there for me. There we go. And then you can start to see my repositories getting pulled in. With that, I'm going to pause this part of my demo here. I'm going to hop back over to the slides and we can walk through the next step in our SBOM lifecycle.
While you're transitioning there, Cortez, we have a couple of questions, if I can pose those here for you.
Yeah, please do. Ask away.
Okay. Someone asks, NTIA defines author, consumer, and supplier terminology. Your NTIA slide depicted different NTIS terminology as a reference. Is that maybe we took a little creative license? I don't know. Is there a difference between those?
I apologize. I guess I'm not sure which slide they're referring to at this time.
I think that's the builder user, builder buyer operator.
Oh, these are not defined as it pertains to like supplier and author as it pertains to how we generate SBOMs, and we do that compliant as it pertains to the NTIA standards. This is just our definition on who the consumers or the actual people using SBOMs would look like. And so we do still follow the formal definitions based off of the NTIA standards, and our SPDX is fully NTIA compliant as it pertains to the conformance checker as well.
Okay, fabulous.
Was there any other questions that you had coming in at this time?
There's one more. Once we identify security vulnerabilities in SBOM through software composition analysis tools, how do we prioritize risk and mitigation apart from CVSS score? And that might be something, I don't know if that's something we want to leave to later in the presentation, but I'll pose it here.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will speak a bit about that on the managing side. But yeah, I think I totally agree, right? CVSS is a good starting point, but it by no means is a end-all be-all for managing risk. Some of the things that I would highly start with is figure out what your own risk posture is, meaning, or risk tolerance is probably a better term, saying that an average customer, in my perspective, would probably care mostly about direct dependencies because those are ones that you can most directly action on. You'll care about the vulnerabilities that are critical or high. And then most importantly, does it have a fix available to it? If it doesn't have a fix, then obviously you have to put a different mitigation tactic in place. And then from there, we start to get some additional signals associated with it. Some of the signals that we already have in app today is that package abandoned, meaning that the maintainer has not updated it over the course of the past 2 years? Or is that package outdated as defined by your own internal policy because it is 3 or 4 major or minor versions behind? And these are all definitions that you can do within FOSSA's policy. And then even beyond that, some of the additional signals that we're actually in the process of adding right now, which I won't be able to demo for you today, but will be available before the end of August, is going to be EPSS and exploit maturity as well. And those are from the CISA exploit maturity, and then EPSS from first org. And so both of those additional signals then will be exposed within the issue dashboard that I'll show you later. And I think it'll make a little bit more sense when I get to the managing aspect. But I think it's a great question.
Great, awesome.
Perfect. Well, now that we've successfully onboarded our particular project, what do we want to do, right? We got to start generating some SBOMs, and there's a few questions that you may think about as it pertains to generating SBOMs. You may wonder, well, which format should I use? And there's, 2, I would say, primary SBOM formats in the form of SPDX and CycloneDX. But you can actually think about nearly all of our reporting formats as a form of software bill of materials, just not matching those particular formats. And so we have HTML, we have plain text, we have PDF. And so you can kind of choose between any of the ones that you want to use, which I'll show you here in a bit. But then you also need to decide what fields are important to you. And so, of course, as I was mentioning earlier, we do make sure that we meet the minimum element from a NTIA perspective. But there's a bunch of optional fields that you can decide if you would like to include or not. And then we kind of give you that flexibility. That said, let me go ahead and hop right back over into my screen share, and we can talk a little bit more about our project. As we picked up, we're in our webinar demo 5. In our review project, we've started to detect some license issues and some vulnerability information associated with that. But let's go ahead and generate our particular SBOM. As you can see within our reporting formats here, we have licensing focused formats, vulnerability focused formats, and then SBOMs, which kind of combine information from both. I'll hop over to our SBOM formats here for a second, but I can talk through some of the other ones that we have as well. Going on my left-hand side here, you'll see that exact same breakdown from a reporting type, but then the additional SBOM focus formats that we have. So that's SPDX in both JSON and tag value, and then CycloneDX in both JSON and XML. Now we have some additional fields that we can include, right? Do you have project declared licenses that you've added in the project itself that you want to include, or any first party licenses? Do you want to include file matches? In this case example, I'm actually going to jump over to CycloneDX and generate one of those. And the reason being is because I want to include vulnerabilities and make sure that we have that VEX statement there so we can kind of speak to that a little bit. You also see a whole host of additional metadata that you can decide to include, right? Do you want to make sure that your declared licenses are there? Do you care about any issue resolution notes because you have mitigation in place for any issues that appear? Do you care about things like the package download URL, which is distinctly different from the Perl, which we'll already include, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of options based off of what your own internal program requirements are. And then once you have that properly configured, you've decided you want to do your CycloneDX SBOM, we can just go ahead and generate that very, very quickly. And just like that, that SBOM is done. Let's go ahead and open that up and we can kind of talk about that a little bit more here. Okay, perfect. So this is my CycloneDX SBOM here. This is one that I generated right before that webinar, but as you saw, I could very easily just open up that same one. So this is from my webinar 2 revision here, and the new one from the webinar 5. Looking at some information that we'll kind of find here. What's your kind of component breakdown and all the required fields coming from a CycloneDX perspective? What type of dependency relationships do you have as well? And so jumping down to my dependency section, I can see here's my project. Here's all the dependencies that project depends on. And then a little bit more interesting, here's a direct dependency, and then here are the transitive dependencies that this particular direct dependency depends on. And then lastly, we can also hop in and see what vulnerabilities have been both detected and included as a part of this particular VEX statement. And so here's your BOM reference. Here's any additional CVE information associated with it, any CWE information, and then most importantly, are you affected by this particular vulnerability or are you not? And I'll show you here in a bit on how you can, modify that. But in this case, we had 2 vulnerabilities, both of which we are affected at because we haven't done any management of our SBOM up to this point. And so high-level recap, you can hop into the UI, generate your SBOM of choice based off of whatever formats that you would like to use. And then from there, hit that generate button and be off to the races. And of course, SBOMs can also be generated directly from the CLI as well. And so if you'd like to do this as a step immediately after your build process in CI, you can build, analyze, and then generate an SBOM all within a few steps. That said, I'm going to hop back over to my slides and we'll continue through the demo. All righty. So now that we've generated our particular SBOMs, let's kind of talk about SBOM management. And SBOM management is a really interesting term, I would say, because when you think about SBOM management, there's kind of two parts to it. One, how do I manage the detections that have come from a particular project, whether that's me importing an SBOM or analyzing a project that I own. But then 2, how do I make sure that I have an up-to-date analysis each time I submit a new commit or a new revision, and so I can have a one-to-one mapping from an SBOM perspective there. And so I can talk you through, or I'm going to demo both of those examples here, but both issue management and then the one-to-one mapping are the core use cases that I think about SBOM management. And it's really impossible to do that if your SBOM lives in a Google Drive folder somewhere or on somebody's internal directory, because you'll never have that one-to-one mapping, and then your issues will end up in a separate database somewhere, which become challenging to then manage. So let's kind of talk through a little bit more on what that looks like in our UI. All righty. So we're back on our exact same project here. I'm going to continue to kind of work through this one. We can immediately kind of see what detections have started to pop up here. Looks like we have, 42 flag dependencies from a license compliance perspective. We got some abandoned dependencies from a, maintenance perspective, and we have a few vulnerabilities as well. And then some additional risk signals that we make available to our customers. One of those first things I'll talk through is, some of these license compliance issues. And so in this case, I've purposely modified my policy to be very transparent. Views is open source. It uses extremely permissive licenses. There's no real issues here, but I wanted to kind of demonstrate what are potential detections. So this particular policy flags MIT and commercial licenses and BSD as well, which is why we start to see these. And so we can really investigate, those particular issues if we'd like. I can see which particular dependency was found, which license files have found these particular detections, so I can then verify. Oftentimes license obligations are multi-license or dual license, and so you can kind of choose between those. And so just making sure that you're actually looking at those detections to see which license has been found and how to opt into those particular obligations. From a vulnerability perspective, this is where we can start to look at the two detections that we found. And this is where I think the issue management really plays into part as well. And so in this particular case, I have two vulnerabilities, and I want to speak to a little bit about your prioritization kind of conversation here. Obviously only two issues here, so it's going to be a little bit harder, and I'll show you in global issues after I import, but you'd probably want to start filtering down based off your risk profile. And so I know one of these right away don't have a fix available to them, so this is going to cut down from two issues down to one, and then I'm kind of off to the races after that. Let's go ahead and remove these filters though, just so we can say like, okay, you know what? This particular vulnerability doesn't have a fix available, so because of that, I'm going to add some mitigation outside of this particular package. And that's what's going to allow for me to continue to use this without having to be concerned. And so in this particular case, we're going to ignore this issue because we do have some exposure mitigation in place. And do our SBOM webinar demo. And the beautiful thing about making sure that you actually triage your particular issues is then when you go to generate your SBOM, these will not appear in your vulnerability section because you are no longer affected by those. And that allows for you to have that accurate and up-to-date posture of what your true risk profile is as compared to potential risk, which is, you still need to know about it, right? Which is why we still make sure we track those particular issues. You can always revisit them from a ignore perspective, but you're no longer giving this false sense to anybody who's consuming those particular SBOMs. The last thing is thinking about SBOM management from a per commit basis. And so that's why I kind of started with my demo 2 and then submitted that revision for demo 5, because every single time that you're submitting a new commit, you want to make sure that you're then doing a FOSSA analyze against that new commit, and you'll have a full history then of every commit that you've made. You can even manage different branches if you're doing a Git strategy, and be able to have that one-to-one mapping from commit to then generating SBOMs, and most importantly, being able to look at issues at that particular status. And so once again, as we think about SBOM management, it's really issue management that is the key for SBOM management, and then the one-to-one mapping on a per commit basis to ensure that you always have that accurate and up-to-date inventory. With that, I will pause there and then hop back over to the slides. Any questions that are as it pertains to that, Elisa?
Yeah, so a couple of questions have come in. Someone asked, how about human readable SBOMs?
That's a good question. And I can actually, here, I'll share my screen. We can kind of talk about that a little bit. That is actually a really good question from the form of human readable SBOMs. And that's the reason why we offer the report formats that are, kind of public and out there and being mandated, but then we also have our own reporting formats. And so in particular on the licensing side, we have what I consider to be human readable SBOMs in the form of HTML. And I'll actually show you a little bit how you can kind of host this live, and something that our customers do very often, to be able to make that completely transparent. And so here I can just go ahead and download this, and we can kind of look at this a little bit more directly. Okay, so this is now a human readable SBOM. From my perspective, you have a table of contents, you have all dependencies associated there. We can see what dependencies we have. I can even jump down to where that particular dependency is, figure out what license information is associated with it, what package information is associated with it. Are these licenses declared or are these licenses discovered? I can then go look at my full license section as well, so that way I can see every license associated and even expand that to be able to look at the full license text. And so from a machine perspective, right, we obviously have SPDX and CycloneDX. And then from a human readable perspective, I would highly encourage HTML, but Markdown, PDF, CSV, and plain text are all very popular reports as well.
Great. We have one additional question. Does the vulnerability tracking generate a VEX document?
For CycloneDX, it does. Yep. So for CycloneDX, we do currently generate a VEX document.
Great.
We embed it within the SBOM. I know there's multiple ways that you can handle VEX. You can embed it outside of. In our case, we embed the VEX document within the SBOM itself. Perfect. These are all really good questions. I love them. All right, so we've onboarded our projects, we've generated some SBOMs, we started managing them. What are some other SBOM activities that we can kind of think about and perform? And one of those key ones to me personally, and this is actually the true power. Now this is me getting on my cybersecurity soapbox 100%, but as you think about vulnerability management and the true definition of a software supply chain, very, very often it's not necessarily your first party software that you have to be concerned about, it's your third party software that you have to be concerned about, right? In the case of SolarWinds, that's exactly what happened there. And so imagine being able to preemptively have a single pane of glass of all vulnerabilities throughout your entire organization. And that is our goal with SBOM import. And so I do want to emphasize that very rarely would you want to import a first party SBOM, because then in an ideal world, you would just be analyzing that with FOSSA anyway, which is going to give you a more accurate detection. It's primarily in the case of consuming SBOMs from software producers that you are vetting or are currently using, and you want to make sure that you can always understand what that risk posture is. And I'll show you how that plays into a larger strategy here in a second. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and then we can talk about SBOM import. Alrighty. So if you think about kind of going back to those import methods I showed you earlier, CLI, quick import, we talked about that. And then now we can talk about SBOM import. Today, we only support CycloneDX, and that is primarily because CycloneDX requires a Perl, a package URL, and that is critical for us to be able to identify these particular SBOMs, packages, and then relate them to the open source version, open it, do a license compliance and vulnerability information against it. Now, SPDX 3.0, unfortunately, is still not requiring Perls, but they are making it a more prominent aspect in the document. And given all the different use cases for SPDX, I talked to Gary O'Neill a lot. I understand why they aren't requiring it, but in my ideal world, SPDX would require Perl as well. Anyway, that aside, we can go ahead and onboard our particular or import our particular SBOM. These are some examples that I've actually just gotten straight from CycloneDX for demo purposes. And in this particular case, we're doing Keycloak. I'm going to name this Keycloak webinar demo. I think actually I want a capital there. Oh, I apologize, my spelling is off. There we go. All right, I just got to look it up because I'm being a noob today. Here we go. Aha. Add my bomb. Both JSON and XML are supported. The reason I wanted to do that is because I wanted to add it to an existing project rather than add a new project. And so you can think about this as a new version of this particular project that I'm new submitting. And so for producer, Keycloak in this case has already given me an SBOM. They go from version 1.0 to now version 1.3. I want to make sure that I can actually have that one-to-one mapping as well. And that maintains that historical reference within FOSSA also. And so we'll go ahead and import that particular SBOM. We will include it. We'll add it to our SBOM team, and then you can see how that then appears in our UI afterwards. And so in this case, this is all of my projects, right? I can quickly filter down to ones that are coming from an SBOM import. And in this case, it's our Keycloak webinar demo. and I'll start to show you some of the additional versions. And so this is the one that I've just recently submitted. This is now being scanned and analyzed for dependencies, figuring out which packages are in there, downloading them all, analyzing those for licenses, and then comparing vulnerabilities against that as well. And so while all that's happening in the background, we'll talk about the version that I already have submitted. And the power of importing SBOMs, this then plays directly into all the other issue remediation that we've already talked about. And so now I can quickly see what license issues are surfacing because of this particular SBOM and what vulnerabilities are surfacing, and then any additional risk information such as outdated packages and abandonware, so on and so forth. And so in this particular case, I can hop in, we can kind of check out some vulnerabilities associated with it. I can even group these by version. This will be set as the default state here in a week. I'm kind of just giving you some early insight, but I can quickly now see, okay, well, these are the packages that have the most issues associated with them. And if I filter down to a direct perspective, kind of going back to that prioritization that we talked about earlier, this is how I would prioritize being put in your shoes. And this is now my beginning list that I would go after to start removing these vulnerabilities. And so very quickly, what appeared like 248 vulnerabilities is actually, 10, 15 or so vulnerabilities, right? Yeah, 15, good math. And so that is key number one to why managing or importing SBOMs is so powerful. The second aspect of that is you can then start to look across your entire organization for risk as well. And so we do that in the form of two different views. That first view is going to be your global view. And so from a vulnerability perspective, this is now looking across all projects that I have in my entire organization. Of course, this respects RBAC. And so if you only have certain teams and so on and so forth, it's only going to show you projects that you have access to. But knowing that you can have that single pane of glass across now all my first party vulnerabilities and third party vulnerabilities. And the exact same thing, of course, on the licensing side as well. But the last really powerful part is functionality that we have currently available actually for our Lighthouse customers and are extending here going into September and October is our packages view. And then you can then also manage packages across your entire environment as well. And so if I go back to Keycloak here for a second, I can see that most of these vulnerabilities in this particular case are coming from one package in this Tomcat Catalina package. And so maybe my question is, well, where else is that in my environment? And where else should I be concerned about that? And so being able to quickly look across all packages that I have, see which versions are being used, and know that in this case, they're being used in these three projects, which are all of the same SBOM that I've imported, and then what vulnerabilities are associated with this particular version. So it's that investigation looking across first party and third party that unlocks a ton of power. And that is why we highly encourage everyone to make sure that they are requesting these SBOMs from their software producers and then importing them on a per version basis to make sure that you have that one-to-one mapping. That said, I will go ahead and hop back over to our slides.
Great. We have a couple of questions as you're hopping over. So
Okay.
one that's come in is some other providers at least claim that they can ingest SBOMs in both SPDX and CDX formats. Is Perl a hard requirement for FOSSA's ingest process? I missed if Perl will be a part of SPDX 3.0.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Perl is a hard requirement as a part of our ingest process. I do not want to speak negatively to any other software vendors, but if they are ingesting SPDX documents without requiring Perl, I would have highly suspicious on the accuracy of those, right? And the reason being is because if you think about two packages, yes, you can do some fuzzy matching to potentially relate a download URL or a package name to that version, but it is incredibly risky to assume that Vue version 1.0 hosted on GitHub and Vue version 1.0 hosted internally that I forked and potentially have modified are somehow the same package. And they are not. They are different packages, full stop. And that is the reason why package URLs are so important, because that is what allows for you to know specifically down to that package version and revision which one is actually being used, and thus have an accurate risk assessment on that. But yes, Perl is not a requirement for SPDX 3.0. One of the things that we are doing, though, is supporting supporting SPDX import as well, but it will be a hard requirement that that SPDX does have to have a Perl for each package. And that's the only reason why we've delayed that functionality, because without that requirement, it produces more noise than signal.
Makes sense. We have an additional question. If I think it came from earlier in your presentation, if the critical vulnerability is identified in a library which is transitively, not direct dependency, used in an application, can we downgrade the severity from critical to medium?
That's a good question. So we've specifically not, or we've made an intentional decision not to get into the business of downgrading vulnerabilities from one severity to another. And the reason being is because vulnerabilities, their ratings can actually change over time if they've been disputed, if they're being reviewed by NIST, if they have new information that comes out that actually, says this vulnerability is more critical than you realize. And so being able to maintain that historical reference of where it once existed, what you've downgraded to, and then what new information has been brought out, I think is tricky business. Now, we do address that in a bunch of ways, as far as to say, like, hey, this is a transitive vulnerability, this is critical, but this is not critical to me because it's used in it's improper input validation, and the particular direct dependency doesn't take any user provided inputs, and so I'm not worried about it, for example. And what we would highly recommend that you do there is do what I kind of demoed earlier, which is ignore that dependency. And you can do that with reasons, right? You can specify why this particular dependency is being ignored, and now you still have the record of that vulnerability in your UI here, which I can show real quickly just to kind of make a little bit more sense. So now you still have the record of that vulnerability, right? You'll always know what's active and ignored, but you've now downgraded it, for lack of a better term, by ignoring that particular vulnerability. And that's something you can always resurface in the future. And so hopefully that answers your question and helps you get a better understanding. I did also, I wanted to make sure I revisited the question about what additional signals outside of CVSS. And so exploit maturity is going to appear here as a filter, and then EPSS is being added right now. Actually, it's going to be out very soon to appear within the issue row itself, and then you can sort based off of that EPSS. And so kind of going back to, this consistent prioritization conversation that we've been having, how do I then filter down to the vulnerabilities that I care the most about based off of my risk posture, and then sort by EPSS. And that then becomes my priority list for the ones that I think are the most critical. Any other questions coming in, Elisa?
There's one that I'll save for last. It has to do with snippet scanning and Gen AI, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay, that's a good one. Alrighty. Well, we are starting to get to the end of our SBOM management lifecycle, if you will. We've obviously talked about onboarding, generating, managing, and then importing these SBOMs. The last piece there is just how do you distribute them, right? And what you do with them. That's particularly if you're a software producer and you want software consumers to be able to easily access that. And there's multiple ways that you can think about distributing SBOMs. Very directly, right? You can generate the SBOM like you've already done. You can host that internally wherever you desire, and then put whatever type of restrictions that you have, right? Maybe it's only a small subset of your software customers that you would like to have access to your particular SBOM, and so you want to make sure that you only host that internally. But if not, if you do have a more open posture as it pertains to distributing SBOMs, and then we actually provide a few ways for you to do that within the UI itself. And so if I, oh, actually not keep low, we're going to hop into view. Go back to our sample project that we've been doing here up to this point. We can see that we have this concept of this live project compliance report. What this does is then generate a report for you based off of that latest revision, which is then going to allow for you to host the human readable SBOM, as we kind of spoke about that earlier. And so now I can quickly see from my compliance report, where's that HTML SBOM at? And then all the same information that we've already kind of talked about, right? What dependencies are there? What licenses are associated, and then what additional copyrights have been brought in because of that. Then you can see I can quickly download in some additional formats. But if I want to make sure that I host a machine readable format, such as the standard SBOM formats over here, then I can also do that. Very similarly, deciding which information I would like to include, including the VEX information. I can see what additional metadata that I would like to include, as well as it pertains to authors and package URLs and package managers and all that kind of good stuff. And then rather than downloading this particular report, which I can always do, I can link to this particular file. And so this now gives me a publicly accessible FOSSA link where essentially I can just throw that anywhere that you would like to host it. And then my users can hit this URL and then immediately download that particular SBOM. And you can see that this will hop into wherever I would like to save any of that particular information. And so as we think about distributing SBOMs, those are the two ways that we kind of handle that today, that we can do it within the app itself. And then I'm really looking forward to, over the course of the next couple of quarters, enhancing that distribution mechanism to be able to provide maybe some of those additional controls that you would like for yourselves, such as RBAC and access and things of that nature. With that, though, that is the end of the distributing SBOMs kind of aspects, and really kind of brings you through the end-to-end life cycle of managing SBOMs, managing projects that onboard SBOMs, and then any issues that you've surfaced because of that. And then, of course, lastly, having that single pane of glass from both first-party and third-party SBOMs.
That's great. So if there are any additional questions about SBOM, managing, generating, importing, distributing, feel free to drop those in the question box while you're doing that. The final question that came in a little earlier was in some earlier FOSSA webinars. It was mentioned that FOSSA is currently building a snippet scanning tool, mainly because of generative AI tools. Any ETA when this will be available, and once it's in place, will there be even snippet level SBOMs supported?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll answer it in two parts. So the first part as it pertains to both snippet detection and then obviously being able to do matching from the snippets that we detected to see if there's any copyleft licenses associated with that particular snippet. Is 100% on our short-term roadmap. It's actively being worked on right now, and I expect that to be out closer to the end of Q3. And so for us, that's closer to the end of September. Now we have a whole bunch of Lighthouse customers who are trialing this for us, helping us with the direction. And so if that's something you're interested in, I would highly encourage you to reach out, whether you're a current customer or a future customer, and we'll love to partner with you on that. In particular, as we think about language support, coverage, and so on and so forth. So that first kind of alpha version, you can expect closer to the end of Q3 into early Q4.
Fabulous. And if someone would like to get started with SBOM import or assistance with generating SBOMs, how can they reach you, reach out to you, speak to you, get in touch?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know right on our website, we have a whole bunch of call to action for managing SBOM import. I would highly encourage you to just hop on there, submit us a request, and then we can go ahead and start to reach out to you, figure out a little bit more about your use case, how your particular language coverage, right, so on and so forth, and then figure out what you're actually looking to do with that importing capabilities. In particular, if it's third-party SBOMs. Now, I do want to say that if you're looking to mostly import SBOMs of your first-party code that you've already generated, maybe from an open source tool, that is a use case, but I would highly encourage you to consider analyzing those projects directly with FOSSA, which is going to give you more accurate detections.
Fabulous. And then I think one final question, do you connect to Jira or ServiceNow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do connect to Jira today, and we can create Jira tickets in FOSSA. We have a two-way linking as well, so you can create those Jira tickets. You can then also update the status of those Jira tickets, so you close a particular issue, and that can ignore that issue or triage that issue on the FOSSA side. If, say, example, your developer's going through it, they like, hey, you created this ticket, but actually I've investigated this particular vulnerability. We're not using the vulnerable function, so we're not concerned about this one. Let's go ahead and close that ticket. That then ignores that issue, and you have that end-to-end loop without your developer ever even having to enter the UI. We don't currently have ServiceNow ticket support, but something that is very common and popular with our customers is we have very extensive API support. And so all of our issues can be very easily grabbed from our API at any point. You can do a full dump if you like, or you can do it on a per project basis. And then our customers very commonly then import that into their existing workflows. And so that can be ServiceNow, that could be Rally, that could be BMO or BMC Remedy with the Smart IT service, or even GitHub issues. And so native support for Jira today, and then of course, we always have API access if you'd like to do anything custom.
Great. So we're wrapping up here. It's about 1 minute before we have about a minute left, I guess. If you have an additional question or something you'd like some more clarity on, please drop it in the questions. If not, and you think of something later, you can contact Cortez at cortez@fossa.com. or if you have other types of questions, just general questions or questions about the demo, hello@fossa.com. And we're happy to sync up with you and answer those.
Yeah, and I did want to make sure, I apologize, that the second half of that question around the Gen AI and the snippets, today, we actually include file matches in our SBOMs, in particular in the SPDX SBOM. And so that's kind of a part of making sure that we're NTIA compliant. And so any snippets that we detect as well would essentially appear as an additional file match and being able to point to that in a very similar way. So I am looking forward to that technology as we launch that.
Great. Thanks for the clarity on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was a great conversation. Thank you, Cortez, for taking a deep dive into all things SBOM. And we look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys.